So, hello and welcome to another episode of the Sliding Doors podcast. For those of you that haven't joined us before, it's a look back at those kind of what if moments, those sliding door moments in life where, life could have gone a different way. And we, as is kind of tradition, we link those to three categories, like other popular podcasts. And my guest today is Holly Edwards, who I'm going to hand over to now to introduce herself.
Hiya, so my name is Holly Edwards. I am the PR manager for Make-A-Wish UK, charity based in the UK, as the name suggests, which grants life-changing wishes for children with critical conditions, so potentially life-limiting conditions or conditions that may require a quite extensive surgery.
Yeah, and I think I'm sure we'll touch on that as we go through, but I know a little bit about Make-A-Wish, and I'm going to be really interested to hear a bit more about that. But as is tradition, we do start with relationships as our first category. Yeah. So what's your sliding door moment there?
Sure. So I listened to the podcast where you interviewed Natalie Lamb. She is a wonderful person, and I thought it was really interesting that she talked about friendship relationships rather than romantic. When I was considering this question, my partner has an amazing sliding doors moment in that he claims that after our first date, he wrote my number down wrong, which is why I didn't hear from him for a few days. And it was only just because he was so needy and desperate that he went back and double checked the number that we've sort of made it together. But as that's his sliding doors moment, I'm not gonna steal that one. So my sliding doors moment is a bit like Natalie's. It's a friendship one. So when I was 14 in secondary school, I remember very clearly being on the field. It must have been, I don't know, early summer, late spring maybe, and my friend bringing over this girl that I'd never met before. She was in my year, but we were in different like bands, so I hadn't really ever crossed paths with her. And my friend introduced her, and she said, "This is Megan. Her friends aren't really talking to her right now, so she'll be hanging out with us for a while."
Yeah, nice way to do it.
Exactly. And I remember thinking, okay, whatever, fine, no big deal, fine. And now obviously that person, Megan, is my absolute best friend and has been the sort of guiding light and grounding force in my life for a very, very long time. And the idea that it was just because she was having a sort of scrap with her friends that day that kind of brought her into my life, and so could so easily have not happened. As I said, we never had classes together or anything like that, certainly not at that point anyway. It's quite extraordinary to imagine my life without her. We are chalk and cheese in some ways, but she absolutely is an incredibly important person in my life, and probably the love of my life, and she will absolutely love me saying that. So
and I find that really interesting, because I think that probably does happen more often than we realize in terms of people's kind of school lives, where and I know it's interesting that you mentioned Natalie's episode, because that was probably the first time that someone had looked at it that way. And it made me reflect certainly on kind of my friendships and how they'd been formed in school. But you talking then kind of reminds me of another one where I ended up going to my first ever gig through a friend of a friend, and then we went on to become, we didn't really know each other. It was just like he was going with his friend, had a spare ticket. I know that Rob likes that as well. Like, can he have the spare ticket? And then again, I was probably like 14 at the time. And then we spent that whole journey to the gig, and then on the way back from the gig, getting to know this kind of this extra friend, if you like. And then we became friends based off kind of that experience. And you're right, it's funny how these things can kind of spark, and they can happen, and then you go on to have, like you say, kind of shared experiences. They stay in your life.
Absolutely.
Like, it's crazy how those moments can really be.
Definitely, just a random Tuesday or whatever it is. And I think especially it's interesting that you were also 14 in that case, because 14 is such a tricky age, isn't it? You're between two worlds. You haven't really decided who you're going to be yet. And very much the friends that I had when I was that age, and sort of 14 to 16, the friends I made at that time are friends with whom I have a very specific, close relationship with, where you know, they've seen me at my absolute worst. They've seen every version of myself that I tried on when I was a teenager, trying to figure out who I was, and, you know, stuck around for better or for worse, which is a real privilege. And I'm very fortunate. I've had a few of those experiences where you've just immediately clicked with someone. They're rare, but they're lovely when they happen.
And I think it's really interesting as well, like you say, that kind of 14 age group, that is kind of certainly in my school anyway, if I remember rightly, it's kind of the first time where you start to really mix with, like you say, other people you don't interact with. I think in the first, certainly in the first couple of years, you tend to stay within your group or your banding or however, and then it is that kind of midpoint, isn't it, where you start to mix, and then suddenly there's this whole other world of people that you hadn't interacted with before, and all of a sudden, you know, these interactions lead to friends that you never would have had otherwise. So I think that's really interesting.
Picture your life without them. Then it's
but yeah, that's a really great share, I think, and something that I can definitely relate to, and I'm sure a lot of people listening will be able to relate to as well. So moving on to our kind of work and kind of career sliding door moment. So we'll kind of get on to what that moment is, but I'll also really be interested to kind of hear about your current role. And that's just for my own interest, really. So if anybody else listening is not interested, you know,
just by all
means tune out. But I'm just really interested in your role and what you do, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I really love my job. I know it's disgusting when people say that. You just think, oh, you loser. But I really do. I absolutely love my job. It's a real privilege. So I'm the PR manager at Make-A-Wish UK. Make-A-Wish UK is part of a global movement. People are often very familiar with the Make-A-Wish brand. Obviously in America, which is where it was founded, it's absolutely huge. You know, everybody kind of knows it. But here in the UK, it's a slightly odd one, because we quite often find that people assume we are kind of connected more thoroughly than we are to the American branch. We are obviously all part of the same kind of global mission, but we do operate independently. So we have there's a couple of criteria to be eligible for a wish. So it's under 18s. You have to be referred by a medical professional. So you know, your doctor or nurse or whatever can ring up Make-A-Wish and say, we have this child who, you know, either has recently been diagnosed or has been living with a critical condition, or is about to have, you know, quite a major operation, for example, like a heart transplant or something like that. And we think they deserve to have a wish. And kids, obviously, as you know yourself as a father, kids have the most incredible imagination, and they wish for all sorts of things that you get your sort of standard ones that most of us can kind of imagine, like to go to Disneyland, or, you know, to have a really fancy laptop or whatever it might be, those sorts of things. But then you also have really lovely stories like Sophia, who is a 5-year-old girl with a heart condition. She has a life-limiting condition. She had heart failure when she was 10 weeks old. And then had a heart transplant, which was successful, thankfully. But unfortunately, heart transplants don't last forever. It's sort of 10 to 20 years. So she will have a shorter life than she deserves. But you would not know it if you met her. She is a ball of energy, life, happiness, and joy. She's just the most adorable child. And her wish, and this is very sweet, you'll like this, is just to have lots and lots of chocolate. So that was her wish. Okay. So I think many of us can relate to that.
I'm on board with that. Absolutely.
Yeah. And her wish was granted in October 2021. She and her sisters and her mum, they all went to Hotel Chocolat in London and had this amazing sort of chocolatey experience. And it's an opportunity for kids and their families and their siblings as well, you know, to have a day where you're not worrying about hospitalizations or what the future might hold, or, you know, the grueling regime of treatments and all the rest of it. It's just a day where you can just be a kid again, because things get very dark for children when they're given a diagnosis, Make-A-Wish, it doesn't have to be a terminal diagnosis to be eligible for a wish. We do have many wish children who have survived and are thriving and are will hopefully live a very long time yet, but you do have that kind of darker element, and when the darkness comes, it's really lovely to work for an organization that brings light back into the lives of children and families. It's a really lovely job. I'm very lucky.
There's just two reflections there for me, I guess, and the first one obviously is, I can't imagine what that was like for Sophia in terms of, as you say, as a father, my little girl had an issue with her hips, and that was bad enough. That luckily she's fine and healed pretty quickly, but at the time it felt all encompassing, and that is only, that's very low end of the scale compared to what she's gone through. So I can't even imagine that. And I find that really interesting in terms of adding some of the context. Like you say, I think a lot of people, certainly myself, and I'm sure a lot of people listening will be familiar with Make-A-Wish, but again, like you said, probably through the American route, in terms of that's where I probably noticed more publicity around it. And like you say, that I've in my experience has been people having wishes granted where they want to meet people, certain celebrities or whatever. So it's interesting, like you say, to hear that just having chocolate is somebody's wish, when you think that feels or would feel quite insignificant to us as an adult, but actually to a child and one that's going through obviously a lot of stuff is, that
it means the world.
feels makes the world to them. So I find that really interesting. But getting us back on track, what is your sliding door moment around the career?
Sure. It's a good question, and there were lots of things that could have come up. So I haven't always worked in the charity sector. I started in kind of marketing agencies, which is actually where I met Natalie, and I kind of had my, I guess I started in social media basically, and digital, and that was really my focus. So my first charity job was as a social media officer at an organization called Meningitis Research Foundation. And I started there as the social media officer, worked there for 4.5 years, ended up being communications manager. And obviously charities have had a really rough time in the pandemic, as so many of us have, which meant that the comms team at Meningitis Research Foundation got a lot smaller one day. And I was basically, it was me and my director were kind of the only ones left in the sort of communications department. And I remember very clearly one day, my lovely boss, Rob, he said to me, he was like, look, Holly, I know social media is your bag and digital and all that kind of stuff, but I could really use your help with the PR side of things, bringing up journalists, all the rest of it. And to me at the time, I was like, no, that sounds awful. I definitely don't want to do that. I don't want to be ringing up journalists and pestering them. And, I don't know what my idea of PR was, but it wasn't good. And I remember very clearly just saying like, no, I don't want to do it. And Rob was like, yeah, no problem. I'll carry on doing it. It's absolutely fine. But then our chief executive actually got COVID in 2020, and he was off for a very long time, which then meant that Rob had to step into that role. So there was no one else that could do the PR role. And I can remember him saying, okay, Holly, I'm going to need you on this Friday to ring up some journalists, because we've got this story that we really need to be pushing out, and it's a big story and it's important, so we need you to do it. And I was like, okay, Rob, anything for you, Rob. And he talked me through, and he was really, really great. And this was on the Thursday, and he was like, so tomorrow, just get up in the morning and just start calling. And I can remember waking up and thinking, oh God, I don't want to do this. And just feeling absolutely sick, just like, I don't want to do this. It's going to go so wrong. But I decided, I've just got to do it. So I spent the whole day ringing journalists and kind of, pitching in, selling this story. And it was one of the best days ever. I absolutely loved it. Turns out journalists are just people too. Who knew? Yeah, exactly. And when you are in the very fortunate position of working for a charity where the stories you're telling really mean something and really matter, you know, it's such a good feeling to know that you're helping to tell people's stories. So that particular story was a lovely woman called Zara, who had survived meningitis and, you know, was doing well and wanted to kind of raise awareness and tell her story. And she was so grateful. So the journalists were really delighted that I've given them this fabulous story. And then the case study themselves was just like absolutely delighted as well. So it's actually just wonderful. You really, really enjoy it. And it was like a buzz. And I've just been chasing that buzz ever since. And I'm now very lucky that I get to do that as my full-time job.
And I think that's really interesting. Like you say, you had that moment of, I can't do this, you know, absolutely. And I can fully relate to that. I was in retail for a long time, very comfortable with what I knew how to do. Quickly, towards the end of my retail career, I guess, found that I preferred the people side. Thought I kind of knew what that was. So thought I'd move over to HR. And then once I was in HR, and all of a sudden it's, you know, you're ringing candidates to say no, or you're doing employment checks on them, and there's all these employee relations concerns. You know, HR has a myriad of problems. But it then quickly went to, I can't do this. I can't have these conversations. I've not been used to having these conversations. You know, I had done my training. I've got a qualification at that point, but the qualification only gets you so far. And then it was, now I've got to have these difficult conversations. And like you, I went, no, I can't do it. And until then it becomes, so in my first HR role, I was coming in as like a shadow for someone. And then literally that next week she went off sick for a number of months. So I very quickly had to step into her shoes. But I think that massively helped in terms of, I went from I can't do this to I have to do this to doing it really well. And then you know what I mean? So I can fully relate in terms of that journey of, you go from I can't do it, it's so scary, to no, actually I'm doing it really well. I've delivered a really good piece of work. And then, like you say, it's that buzz then of getting that good feedback again, isn't it? Or, you know, that kind of reaction. So I fully relate there in terms of that kind of experience. And you know, just around kind of PR. So I'm not overly familiar, but also for those listening, how did you find the kind of the transition between the two roles? Because obviously that's quite a difference, isn't it, in terms of what you were doing to obviously what you do now?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the interesting thing was, I mean, the pandemic for me, obviously the pandemic was absolutely horrendous, and talking about the pandemic is difficult because we all had such different experiences of it, of course. So for some people, you know, they lost loved ones, they may have become very, very poorly themselves and are still living with long COVID. For me, it was amazing. So in terms of career progression, it was extraordinary. You know, it was awful to lose so many members of the team, but it did mean that I had a real kind of baptism of fire in the world of communications, particularly working for a health charity in the middle of a pandemic. So I was still doing the kind of social digital side of things whilst learning how to do PR on the job. So I sort of it was quite lucky really in a way. I had kind of 2 years of learning how to do all of it, absolutely everything. And I had the most amazing support of my boss, Rob, incredible colleagues, Kat, Rosanna, Catherine, who really just kind of had my back and cheerleaded me throughout the whole experience. And then when it sort of came time to leave MRF, because I had spent 2 years doing absolutely everything, and I thought, you know what, I'd maybe like to just do slightly, not less, but just, you know, more focused work, shall we say. I thought, I'm really done with social. You know, I'd been working in social since I graduated, and social is obviously a huge part of my life. I spend most of the day flicking between Twitter and Instagram, like most millennials. And I just thought, I don't want to do this for work anymore. I just want to do the thing that I really like doing, which is the telling the stories and the talking to families and the, you know, getting the little, as we say, the buzz of the feedback and the approval. So yeah, I just got very, very lucky, and then Make-A-Wish were hiring the PR manager role, and never in a million years did I think I'd get it. Never in a million years, but I just yeah, I think I just said all the right things, and we just really connected, my new boss and I. So
that's sometimes the biggest thing, isn't it? Like, so there's two things I want to pick up on there. One is that I also worked for a healthcare charity throughout the pandemic, and very much had that baptism of fire aspect. Because so I joined them about 6 weeks before we went into lockdown, and so I was very, very new, but it ultimately really shaped my HR experience, because then we're facing stuff that no one had ever faced before from a HR perspective. But also you add in the social care kind of healthcare charity element to it, and all of a sudden that's multiplied by 10. So yeah, I can fully relate to that baptism of fire experience.
That must have been so hard. Gosh, being specifically in that sector must have been so challenging.
Yeah, it was interesting, and it certainly helped in terms of where I am now. And you're right, like where I am now, I, similar to you, kind of applied thinking that feels like a stretch. It feels like I'm not gonna quite get it. But then, like you say, you connect with the people that ultimately are going to be your manager, and we are where we are. So everything happens for a reason, doesn't it? As
well done, us.
Let's give ourselves a little pat on the back there.
Exactly. Well done.
So that takes us quite nicely into our third and final category. And this one always brings a bit of trepidation from myself, because I don't ever know what you're about to say. So it is the wild card, and this obviously is a sliding door moment that is specific to you.
Okay, so this is a bit more intense, so sorry, but the sliding door moment that I think really altered the full course of my life and could have so easily have not happened was the day that I was officially kind of diagnosed with PTSD and anxiety, and was given a prescription for antidepressants. So this was many years ago now, I think coming up to 5 years ago. And I'd had a pretty rocky time of it, shall we say, after graduating from university. I'd sort of imploded my own life and made some terrible decisions, which anyone who knows me that's listening to this will be laughing at, because terrible decisions is quite a light way of putting it. And I just gotten into a new relationship with the person that I'm fortunately still in a relationship with, and he was very, very patient and very kind with a very sad person that I was then. And he said to me, he was like, I think you need to go and talk to someone. And of course, your first instinct, I think I was 24 at the time, was to be like, there's nothing wrong with me, you're just really pushing back, full defensive kind of lizard brain. But I knew I really liked this guy, and so I thought, I'll just go to the stupid appointment just so he knows that I've done it. And I wouldn't have gone if it weren't literally next door to my house. I am a fundamentally very lazy person. I don't like to do anything that I don't want to do ever. So this was a thing that I really didn't want to do, but I was like, it's next door. Just roll out of bed, fall into the doctor's office, have the boring conversation. They'll probably prescribe you a couple of weeks of therapy or whatever. And then I went, and I so nearly didn't go, but I thought, well, I'll just go. This guy seems worth it. So I went to the appointment, and I kind of got chatting. And I know that often people have very different experiences of the mental health sector. So I very much realize I'm speaking from a position of privilege here, in that I got very lucky, and the doctor that I spoke to that day was incredibly receptive, very kind, very sort of took me seriously, basically. So I sort of kind of told her the feelings I've been having for years, and some of the sort of things that kind of happened to me in my late teenagehood, early 20s. And then she just turned to me and she said, okay, it sounds like you've got PTSD and anxiety. And I was like, oh, can I swear? I was like, oh shit. I was like, oh shit, yeah, of course I do. And it was the first time that anybody had ever said those words to me, particularly the sort of PTSD angle, because you think PTSD, you think soldiers coming back from war, or children like the children I now work with at Make-A-Wish, who've been through something genuinely horrifying and traumatic. And she gave me a prescription for sertraline, which I remain on to this day. And I am now the annoying person who, whenever motivational speakers are talking about like, oh, you just need to believe in yourself, I'm the person in the back of the room being like, actually, maybe you need to medicate, because I am now so pro, if you have been struggling for many years with your mental health, and you do all the therapy, you do the meditation, you do the exercise, whatever it is, and it's still not working, I, in my personal experience, have really benefited from medication, and it really just turned my life completely around. So I became a better partner, better daughter, better friend, better employee, and it really just altered the entire course of my life. And I can't imagine who I would be now if I hadn't gone for that appointment. And I'm just so grateful that my partner pestered me into it and then stuck around through the whole process.
I think that's a really, really good share, and obviously a really good story in terms of kind of where you've come from and where you are. I just want to touch on you say, I think generally not just 20s, but I think even into your 30s, you can be quite resistant. I'm certainly have been certainly for a while, was very resistant in terms of looking after my own mental health, and to this day probably still am a little bit reluctant in terms of that, and that's whether that's just me as a person or whatever. But I think it's a really, really interesting, like you say, that people are resistant, people are and then there's, like you say, the flip of the coin is there's inspirational speakers out there. We've had one on the pod in Nick that they do wonderful jobs, but it's not for everyone. Like you say, there's going to be people in the room that have other ways of coping with things they've been through. So you're right. I think if anyone takes anything away from this, is that you are very much an individual, and then you go through whatever you go through. Like you say, you've been through stuff, I've been through stuff, I'm sure everyone listening has been through stuff.
Everybody has.
But it's important just to find your way of dealing with that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, absolutely. I know many people in life who've really benefited from other ways of treatment, shall we say. So, leaving toxic relationships, or CBT therapy can obviously be really helpful for people. Meditation, changing career paths, all these little things, whatever it might be, learning to say yes, learning to say no. That's something that I know certainly a lot of people could help with. But certainly for me, I mean, just making that decision to just be like, I'll just try this medication for 6 months and I'll see if things get better. And they just got so much better and have continued staying well. For me, it was like obviously self-care, as you've touched on, is a really massive, important kind of part of living in the world and taking control of your own well-being. But I've been doing that and it wasn't working. And then as soon as I sort of got this prescription, and after a few months it sort of actually started to work, it was just like it was like I'd been wearing a blindfold my whole life, and people have been saying, no, you can see, you just need to believe in yourself, or you just need to choose happiness. And I was like, but I'm really trying, I still can't see. And then it was just like the blindfold came off, and it was like, oh, this is what people were talking about. This is seeing. I get it now. You can just be happy in the world, So obviously it doesn't work for everyone. People have very different experiences, and also, again, I'd stress, I was in the very fortunate position of having a wonderful doctor who really looked after me. And, not everybody has that. There are an enormous range of medications out there. And we certainly tried different kind of dosages and things before we hit on the right amount for me, which isn't the case for everybody, and certainly isn't the case with people who without access to the NHS either. So obviously, this was all from the NHS. So but certainly for me, it was a life-changing moment.
And I think that is the perfect place to end in terms of I think that I don't think it's going to get much better than that in terms of a closing line. There's not certainly anything I can add there. So I would just like everyone listening to like, share and subscribe. Thanks for thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.
Thanks, Rob.